Chairman of the Democratic Caucus, joined by the Vice Chairman, Joe Crowley, and our Chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Ben Ray Lujan. You just heard Leader Nancy Pelosi of the House Democratic Caucus, and of course, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and candidate for president, speak to you about our meeting that we just concluded with Secretary Clinton to discuss a number of things. I thought it was a powerful meeting. She made a very strong case on how America still has a chance to be that beacon of hope and to lead the world. And she said a phrase in describing a story way back when she decided to run for the Senate in New York, where she was talking about daring to compete. And this was at a Title IX conference where she was daring young women and girls to compete. And she mentioned that as she had been introduced by this young woman athlete, the woman whispered into her ear, "Dare to compete." And it was at that point she said that she made the decision to run for the U.S. Senate for the state of New York. And I think many of the members in this caucus meeting would have said to her today, "We are thankful that you're daring to compete." And it is a good sign that someone as experienced as Hillary Clinton in the affairs of government, on the issues that affect the entire world, and certainly someone who can speak not just as the former Secretary of State, a former senator, but as a mother, first lady, grandmother, is someone who is as well-rounded as we've ever seen to run to become the next president of the United States. We were fortunate to have her come visit. We would invite any of the candidates for elected office to the presidency to come visit, and we are hoping to have an opportunity to move forward an agenda between now and 2016, November 2016, that will let us show that we dare to compete in this country. And so we talked about the Iranian agreement. We talked about, principally, as Leader Pelosi said, the need to compete economically here at home and to create good-paying jobs. I love that she said that you can't have growth without fairness, and you can't have fairness without growth. And I believe that Hillary Clinton has made it very clear that when it comes to America competing, it will be based on economic growth and economic fairness. With that, let me yield to the Vice Chair, Joe Crowley.
I just have one correction for the chairman. I think he meant to say we invite every Democratic candidate for president to come before
No,
the
we invite
caucus.
every candidate to come.
Every candidate, all right. Well, I may not be able to make all those meetings then. That'll be near 20. But let me just join Chairman Becerra in thanking the former First Lady, the former Senator from my home state of New York, and former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton for being with us this morning. An incredibly well-attended caucus, not surprisingly. And I think the way in which she handled every question, there had to be dozens and dozens of questions or statements, and the detail in which she answered them was remarkable. And so we do just want to express our thanks for that, as well as her insight in terms of the Iranian deal and her perch as the former Secretary of State, and just sharing with us some of those thoughts as well, as we, the Congress, move now to deliberate on what the White House and Secretary Kerry have achieved in this agreement. As you know, the details were important to me personally, as I know it is to every member of Congress. And we take this opportunity, I take this opportunity now to look into this agreement in more detail before rendering a decision. I come with this with a great distrust for the Iranian government, as the Secretary said, the existential threat that it poses not only to the State of Israel, but to all of our friends within the region and to our friends in Europe and the United States as well. Certainly hoping that the agreement is something I can support if it puts out of reach the ability of the Iranian people to create nuclear weapons. So with that, let me turn it now over to the our chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Ben Ray Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman. As you heard today, we had a great conversation with Secretary Clinton. The caucus welcomed her. It was great to just see the back and forth that was going on as well. I think that it's clear that if Secretary Clinton is chosen as our Democratic nominee, that she brings experience, energy, that she'll excite so many parts of America to come forward. Everyday, hard-working Americans who deserve a chance, who want to get ahead, and when they get ahead, stay ahead. What intrigued me most about a story that Secretary Clinton shared with us today is something that reminded me of my father. She shared a story of an experience where a truckload of workers would get bussed on in, and waiting for all their moms and dads at that spot would be all their kids. And as the parents would get off that bus, the kids would come running up and give their parents a hug. They'd get lifted up. And you just see that smile and that exchange with their parents who came home safely from honest days of work to look after their families. There were days when my father, as an iron worker, would go and fire up this old Chevy that he had, and sometimes it wouldn't start. Sometimes he'd have to thumb to work, and one of his co-workers would give him a lift. But at the end of the day, in his little lunchbox, Dad would sometimes have a cupcake or half a tortilla or half an apple that was waiting for whichever one of us, with my brothers and sisters, would be the first to greet him. And it was always with a hug and with a lift. I think what the Secretary said today is something that everyone across the country gets, and she gets as well, is we need to make sure that our families are going to be looked after and that everyday hardworking people have a chance. And that's something that I was really excited about today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the Chairman. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions.
Did she specifically sell you on the Iranian deal? Did she encourage members of the House Democratic Caucus to support the deal?
She did a very good job of giving us some history so we can put this agreement in context. She talked about the work that goes into striking the best deal possible. She talked about the fact that no deal is ever going to be a perfect deal, but what we have to have is a deal that not just works, but measurably moves us in the direction that we're hoping to achieve. And in this case, halting nuclear proliferation, and certainly by the country of Iran. And so I think a lot of us will take a very close look at the agreement. Every word will count in this agreement, and I think it's important for us to examine it very, very closely. 80 pages. We should be prepared to read it all to make sure that what we're reading is what we're hearing, and so we can have the confidence of moving forward. But I certainly think that most of us welcome the President's remarks this morning that it appears that a deal has been reached, and now we get to work reading the agreement to see if we can agree with it. This is not about trust. This is all about verifiable, enforceable provisions to keep a lid, as the Secretary said, keep a lid on nuclear proliferation. And so that's what's important here.
Congressman, what do you say to those who argue this emboldens Iran, that ultimately it could destabilize the Middle East if that happens?
I think we're going to hear all sorts of things. I don't think you're going to see unanimity in the country of Iran on this agreement either. What we're looking for is something that, from our perspective, from the perspective of the civilized community around the world, that this moves us forward in trying to halt that nuclear proliferation. It is no easy feat to get China, Russia, and the U.S. on the same page, let alone the 6 economic powers of the world together working toward an agreement with Iran. And so that does give you, or give me, some reason to be hopeful that the words in this agreement are meaningful. But again, at the end of the day, I have a right now as a member of Congress to take a look at this agreement. Joe?
I think, as the Chairman said, each of us will have the opportunity and requirement to read the agreement. I also look forward to hearing from Secretary Kerry and from the White House as well, in terms of hearing their observations about the agreement and about the Iranian government as well moving forward.
Ben, I don't know if you want to.
I would just add, Mr. Chairman, that as we look at this, I also value the opinion of Secretary Moniz as we talk about a nuclear physicist who's on the ground to make sure that the tools are in place to be able to take a look at this, and that experts from around the United States and with our allies and all the partners are able to move forward with those very aggressive inspections. But it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we do read this agreement and get very familiar with it in preparation for whatever debate will take place in the House.
We'll make sure to get a briefing from the administration and those who negotiated the agreement for the caucus.
Did Secretary Clinton have any questions to her about specific economic policy, say trade? Did anyone ask about TPP? And
She raised, and others echoed her comments and praised her for this, talking about her emphasis on helping lower student debt and making it possible for young Americans who've gotten themselves educated but who are graduating with a mountain of student loan debt, the need to help them be able to start their working careers without feeling pressed and stressed by the fact that it costs them a lot of money to get educated. And so she was very excited to hear some thoughts from some of our colleagues about ways to continue to try to reduce the level of student debt that's essentially keeping a lot of young Americans who are so talented from exploring their dreams. And so we're looking forward to working with her on that. She did talk specifically about wages, about the need, as we said before, to have growth with fairness, and she made a really strong point about making sure that we don't just let the growth go to those who are at the top, but that everybody who produces that wealth. The productivity of American workers has gone up, but their pay seems to stay stagnant, and she made a very strong point about how we have to make sure that if you work hard and you show you're being more productive for your company, that you should benefit as well. You should be able to enjoy the fruits of all that work that you did. So she talked about a number of things, but those are the two that stay close to my mind.
Can I bring up the one that popped out to me? I did mention to her the crisis we have in our country in savings and in retirement security. I happened to have on me a copy of my report at the time, Building Better Savings, Building Brighter Futures, and I asked her who I should give it to, and then I handed it to her. So she now has my report on building better savings for our country. But she also acknowledged the importance of the lack of savings in the United States and retirement and security as part of one of the issues that was discussed yesterday at the White House at the Conference on Aging, and recognizing that. But I think Javier is correct in mentioning that the first thing she talked about was wage, the lack of wage increase in the United States and fairness in the United States. So nothing specifically on trade, in my recollection, was brought up by her or any of the members in the caucus this morning.
Was the Benghazi committee brought up, or her email servers or anything like that?
We really concentrated on economic growth and economic fairness. And then she did spend some time giving us her perspective on the negotiations with Iran.
When you report on Planned Parenthood, sort of the hidden video report of Planned Parenthood and fetal body parts, did that come up at all?
Say again, please.
There was a organization that put out a hidden video talking to Planned Parenthood leader about fetal body parts that didn't come up.
There was a question raised about the need to make sure that women, who have become an increasingly important part of the economic vitality of the country, have an opportunity to compete. As she said, dare to compete. And oftentimes, if we don't do what we need to help families, not just women, but families, provide the daycare for their kids, to provide the family leave that a worker needs, that we do all the things that we take for granted because a couple of generations ago, you always used to have the caregiver at home, then you're never going to fulfill the full potential of the country. And so she made a very strong point early on. Rosa DeLauro, one of our colleagues who's been very strong on these issues, raised this point, and the Secretary was very, very passionate about talking about how if we're going to really make America succeed, women in this country have to succeed.
Was there any discussion of the politics of the race, perhaps of the Republican challengers, or maybe of Bernie Sanders and Democratic challengers?
You know, she really stressed the points about the economy and boosting wages and helping American workers. other than that and the discussion on the Iran negotiations, the one thing she did mention was that as hard as Americans are working today, it's kind of difficult to hear some candidates for president talk about how you need to work more hours. And the issue is Americans are working lots of hours. Americans are working really hard, some 2 or 3 jobs. They're just not making any more than when, before. And she talked about how we have to reward people who work hard. And she did mention that if the only way to succeed is to kill yourself and work so many hours that you never get to see your family, then that's not the America that I believe we all grew up thinking that could help achieve the American dream for the next generation. So she did talk about how we need to make sure we reward work.
How would you describe the tone of the Iran conversation? Was there an enthusiasm on her part? or
Was there a what on her part?
Enthusiasm on her part? Did you take it as a full-throated endorsement?
I
Or was
think
there more
she was making observations. She had mentioned, as I think she mentioned here, that she got a call from the president last night, and I think went over aspects of the deal, and was talking from her perch as former Secretary of State on the efforts that began in the Bush administration. This is not something that the Obama administration started. It actually began within the Bush administration and then was carried through by the Obama administration, is something that she had said as well. And just on the other point, one point she did make early on was the problem with so much money in our campaigns. And I think, taking that forward, the lies, many of the difficulties that she's going to have to deal with in terms of responding to disparaging remarks about her. But I think overwhelmingly the spirit within the caucus was incredibly supportive of Mrs. Clinton, and I know I, for one, was proud to support her 8 years ago. I'm even more proud, given her experience now as a former Secretary of State, to support her for president.
Is it correct that she talked about going after individual bankers and banks as far as more Wall Street regulation?
One last final question? Any final questions?
Sorry if you covered this in the beginning, but did Secretary Clinton, in your role in reviewing the Iran...
Say again, Deirdre.
In your role in reviewing this Iran deal, did Secretary Clinton give you any advice? Did she point out any provisions in the deal that she wanted to look at, that she had any reservations about and wanted you to take a quick look at?
Deirdre, I thought what was helpful is she put the negotiations into context. She talked about this isn't just a negotiation that started a year ago or 2 years ago. This isn't a negotiation that was only germinated only with the Obama administration. She talked about how this goes beyond the Obama administration and how we've been trying to deal with Iran for years, under the Bush administration, before the Obama administration as well. And so it was helpful from the perspective of someone who's been there to hear that perspective. I believe she also said that it's important to take a look at the verification language. She also mentioned that this is not about trust, and that we have to look closely at the enforcement mechanisms that are there. And she also mentioned that as Secretary of State, it probably helped her quite a bit to just fully recognize how difficult it is to negotiate some of these things. And she made the point to us that if you're looking for perfection, you're never going to find it. It's whether this is something that really will help us, as she said, put a lid on a nuclear arms race that could develop in the Middle East. So I think she was very emphatic on that. And at the end of the day, I think it made it very clear to at least me that I'm going to be reading 80 pages very closely.
When you say it didn't start with the Obama administration, and when she said it didn't start with the Obama administration, does that mean that dealing with Iran or leave the groundwork for these talks?
The efforts to try to figure out a way to keep Iran from developing nuclear weapons and likely becoming a real menace, not just in the region, but to the world and to us, started well before these sit-down negotiations. And she again tried to put it in context, because if you start at just one particular point in time, you may miss a lot of other things that have gone on, and that becomes important to give you that clear sense of how to judge disagreement, and I think that is important. With that, thank you all very much.